Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the 9th Glasgow Loves EU lockdown chat. Tonight we welcome Greg Dudziak to discuss some Brexit issues with us, and he's discussing Brexit both from a renewable energy expert perspective and as an EU citizen. During the interview, please feel free to comment, and we have Jenny on hand who's reading through comments during the event. So that's a housekeeping over. So welcome, Greg. Hi, and many thanks for agreeing to do the interview with us. Now, by way of an introduction to Greg, Greg is, as I say, a renewable energy expert, and he and I used to work together for the same company, and we worked together for approximately 8 years, I think it was. He is now head of wind energy at Black & Veatch, which is an engineering consultancy. Greg is also an EU citizen, born and raised in France. He now permanently lives in Scotland. He's been in Scotland for over 20 years. He married a Scot, and he is in the process of raising three boys. And that's also something we have in common, because I have three boys also. So in terms of the interview, I'd like to separate out the questions into two separate sections. One will be about the renewable energy sector and how it's going to be affected by Brexit. And then the second series of questions is about basically you being an EU citizen and how you've been personally affected by it. And how you see things panning out in the future. So before we get going on the questions, though, I just thought for everybody's interest, we should just say a little bit about what the renewable sector is all about. In summary, the renewable energy sector or renewable energy generation accounts for about 20–25% of the energy mix in the UK. It's a bigger sector now than nuclear energy, and it's second only to gas in terms of the energy mix in the UK. In terms of renewables, the wind sector is the biggest contributor, and the wind sector is basically separated out into onshore wind and offshore wind. Currently, there are 13.5 gigawatts of onshore wind, and there are 10.5 gigawatts of offshore wind, but the projections are that offshore will become the dominant form of wind generation as we go forward, and the current target is for 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. So in summary, the renewables is a very important sector, both in terms of energy generation for the UK, and it's also important for the whole UK economy. And there are many discussions about it being very important part in the green economic recovery that will be required post-COVID. And it will be important, and it's important now, and it's going to be important post-Brexit. So that's a very basic introduction for you on the renewable energy sector, and I hope that's been useful. So we'll get on with the questions now, if that's all right, Greg. So a first question for you. So your role and the potential impact of Brexit. So a fairly straightforward question to start with. Can you tell me and the viewers about your role in the renewable energy industry, and how you see your role in the wider industry being potentially affected by Brexit?
Thanks, Craig, and hi, everybody. Yeah, so as you said, Craig, I've been working in renewable sectors now for around 17 years, 16, 17 years. I've joined my current employer, Black & Veatch, only a year ago, and I'm heading the wind energy sub-team of Black & Veatch. And as you said, indeed, we are divided in around that lines of, there's a wind leader, a solar team leader, and historically there's been also mostly Black & Veatch has been known for wave and tidal, very important obviously especially in Scotland, and bioenergy. So we exactly organize around these lines, and my appointment and the solar guy appointment has been fairly recent, so that we can move more into these let's say the more dominant sector of the sector. So and what I do is so we're still a very small team in the UK, and again my appointment's been there to try to grow that team in the US. So we have a very large, much larger contingent of people, and I'm dealing personally with my background's been mostly in what we call due diligence, which is the kind of work that happens when anybody wants to either invest, finance, buy or sell a project. So I'm kind of a project manager focusing on due diligence. Namely, I work for either a buyer or a seller or a lender who wants to finance, buy or sell an asset, wind, onshore wind, offshore wind, floating I've done as well. Or sometimes indeed I tend to also sometimes work on either other sectors like solar, like at the moment we've just started a solar due diligence, for example. And the kind of role I do is to review the risk for this client. So if they are, for example, a lender, they want to make sure that the project will be, is risk-free, or at least that the risk is well understood and well mitigated, so that there's no risk for the project to end up not being able to repay the debt. And obviously, if it's a more straightforward acquisition or sale of the project, again, then we are there to advise the buyer or the seller about the project, and again make sure that all the risks are well understood. So that's in essence what I do, and then we're going to also do many more different projects like feasibility studies and all kind of stuff more to do with the development of project, and that's again I'm looking forward this kind of role taking more compared to what I used to do when we were both at our previous employer. With regard to Brexit, so I'll say that I can't think of anything good that has related to Brexit that I would say has had an impact, and only pretty negative things. Although a slight mitigating aspect is that at the end of the day, I think, especially for renewables, and each country, it's the main driver for whether or not a sector like our sector, renewable sector, is thriving or not thriving is actually more linked to national policy. And national policy, some countries have always been pretty, I would say, enthusiastic about especially the renewable sector, regardless of whether they are part of the EU or not. And others have not and been dragging their feet. I think the EU, being part of the EU, actually, the only thing one of the main things going to change is, I suppose, the UK is not going to be bound by the European targets. Currently, I think the UK is slightly behind, not too badly. There's been a lot of work that caught up, especially, as you say, Craig, with the offshore wind sector still booming. But again, in terms of the impact on various subsectors, that has been mostly driven by UK policies. And 5 years ago or so, there's been, for example, a stop given to any support for onshore wind and solar, and that has totally stopped and put a big slowdown on onshore wind and solar development. Whereas the UK policy has always been still very supportive of offshore wind, and offshore wind has continued to thrive. And I think there's been I think one or two other things I thought of that will have potential negative impact, I suppose, is on emerging technologies, because the EU has always had also funding mechanism in place to support emerging technologies such as wave and tidal or carbon capture and storage and hydrogen and things like this. So again, UK leaving the EU means I suspect that all these projects and technologies will not be able to access the funding that the EU was always putting through the framework programs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that has struck me that, there's, just in the experience of dealing with developers is that they're sort of holding back a fair amount on investment decisions, and perhaps not being quite as speculative or spending at the levels they've previously done in recent years. And now, that could be to do with the reduction in subsidies, but I'm sure Brexit is possibly playing a part there.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I think as well, especially for these developers who are playing in various markets and not just the UK. I mean, maybe a UK-based developer only looking at UK project, well, maybe that's not going to impact American policy. UK policy will be the main drivers, but say and we've got a number of our clients who are, say, German-based or French-based or Spanish-based headquartered company. They'll look at it from a European level, and any additional negative impact on a country, any additional country risks such as currency and things like that will play badly, and they'll think twice before investing further into one country compared to another. And I think Brexit is not going to help the UK from that point of view of these international developers looking at where they want to put their money in terms of future.
We'll just all have to see how that pans out. Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Greg. So to my second question. This is to do with the future of renewable energy post-Brexit, so a little bit of crystal ball gazing. As you're well aware, the transition period ends on the 31st of December 2020. We are therefore going to be leaving with a deal with the EU or leaving with a no deal. What is your prediction in terms of a deal or no deal? That's the first part of the question. And then, given each scenario, how do you think things will play out for the renewable sector in both those scenarios?
So I mean, I probably won't surprise you too much by saying that it's very, very unpredictable. I mean, also obviously the COVID crisis has pushed all what's happening we know it's still happening, but it's not really reported very much. So you probably need to dig out to find out how the latest negotiations are going. I think the only time I've heard it in the last 4 or 5 months was not very good. I think Michel Barnier came recently again to pay a visit, and I think I gathered that the progress has been slow. So I suppose that's not going to help. Already, what was a pretty optimistic timescales to reach a deal, that's probably not going to help. So unless there's been some last minute pushback, which I don't think is politically possible. I've not heard. I mean, obviously, correct me if you heard something. I suppose it's not going to help. So I think what's going to make it go or not go at the end is commercial stance, common sense versus the politics, and whether people are going to. Certainly, if the economics is not going to be good having no deal, I suppose the UK government will be a bit more prone to find a compromise and work with the EU. And suppose the EU's got a lot to lose as well if there's no deal, given the impact of COVID. So that has changed a little bit. And hopefully, from a positive point of view, nobody now is in a there's been enough damage to the economies. If it's nobody's interest to have further damage if there's no deal. So I hope it's the only good of COVID from that point of view, that probably going to help a little bit in making people a bit more less prone in going for political games and protecting the respective economies. I suppose the UK is a bit more to lose than the EU.
Yes, I'd agree with all that. I mean, it's clearly not been transparent what's going on, which makes it very difficult for businesses. That includes renewable energy businesses trying to plan for what's happening or what's going to happen. I mean, in terms of your own business or Black and Veatch, are they sort of planning for each scenario and have got a very worst case kind of plan for how this?
I mean, since I've joined a year ago, I've not heard too much about the planning and what's planned. I mean, I think what's different is we're heavily, most of the people in Europe for Black and Veatch are actually based in the UK, and we have a very small other subsidiary businesses in Ireland and Germany, and I think that's it in Europe. So we are mostly a UK business, to be honest. So and we are also mostly involved in services. So we're not making widget building projects. So and again, most of our projects are in the UK or the Republic of Ireland. So from that point of view, as a company, we're a bit, maybe a bit less affected, and the risks are a bit less. For me, however, as a very recent joiner, at the moment we focus on again UK and Republic of Ireland projects. So at least with the Republic of Ireland legal entity, we are protected from that point of view. We're doing a lot of business in Ireland, and if there was a no-deal Brexit, that would make it difficult for our clients to contract with us as a UK company. We could contract through the Irish company and still be okay. So I suppose my expectation is that all the contingency plans that all these other companies have in place will probably be rekindled as they know whether it's going to come to deal or no deal. And I think those companies are large enough to have operation in other parts of the EU. Hopefully, especially if it's services, I suppose, hopefully won't be too badly affected. But if you're involved in construction or manufacturing, I suppose that's going to be more tricky, especially if you're a smaller company and you're only operating from the UK. I suppose that's these companies are those who have to get.
I can see that. Yeah. I mean, you've basically answered the third question that I had, Greg. It sounds though Black and Veatch have got contingency plans. In the fact that you've got an entity, another company in Ireland, which is obviously going to remain part of the EU. And I suppose another contingency companies are having to consider is, holding some of their assets, in currency terms in other currencies, which obviously they will do anyway, but perhaps more so because of the possibility of a no deal Brexit. So yes, we answered two in one there. So that's great. So I'll just come to the last question on the renewable energy sector then, which is to do with the international market for energy. So the UK, like many European countries, now have interconnected grid systems. The UK, for example, has interconnections with France and Ireland, Holland and Belgium as well, to my knowledge. And there are also discussions to have other connections with other countries such as Norway. Now, in the case of a no-deal Brexit, how do you think the trading arrangements for importing, exporting electricity will be sorted out? even with a no deal Brexit, do you think there is that the trend towards interconnected grid systems will continue into the future?
So I must admit, I'm not too familiar with the first part of your questions about what would happen for importing, exporting electricity in case of a no deal Brexit. So I probably won't say too much about that in terms of what the likely impact will be. I'd like to think this is a fairly, all these are commercial agreements anyway. It's not. I don't think it's actual the UK as a country that direct this. It's direct agreement, and I'd like to think it's not going to be used as a bargaining chip in the whole process. I don't know if you know more about that.
Well, I think last time I looked, it was between 5% and 10% of our electricity that we get from interconnect.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So indeed, I mean, I think the UK is one of the, compared to the rest of Europe, given its geographical location, is indeed one of the least interconnected country, and therefore, given that UK prices for electricity tend to be higher than the rest of Europe, it's usually UK is actually mostly a net importer of energy and electricity, and typically when the conditions are such that you need to import electricity from France and other countries. And to be honest, with the deployment of renewables, and one of the small negative impact on renewables is the intermittency. As you know, you need to be able to deploy more renewables. You'll need to be able to have indeed more opportunities to balance the grid, and that balancing can only happen by, well, one of the main lever to balance that is indeed able to import or export energy. So I think there was indeed an interconnect has just been put online, I think last year, and increase and there's indeed plans for even more to be in place. And I'd like to think the UK has a lot to gain in being better interconnected with the rest of Europe. And I think as well, offshore wind plays a critical role. But as you know, a lot of the offshore wind development are taking place in the North Sea. And I think there are long-term plans for these to be not only a one-way street for electricity to come from this large offshore wind from the North Sea into the UK, but to bridge the gap and have to use them as a stepping stone to get electricity flowing all across the North Sea to all the countries bordering the North Sea. So there's that, and also the big drive. One of the big other driver is bigger interconnection between the UK and Ireland. The Irish as well have one of the higher proportion of renewable energy on their grid, and also there's going to be an interconnection between Ireland directly into France. And I think they also would be a lot of unlocking and mutual beneficial to have better integration between UK and Ireland. So yeah, I think the UK has a lot to gain from being better interconnected, and hopefully that will be a driver for continued investment given the higher power price in the UK.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and hopefully, there'll be some kind of arrangements with all those European countries that we're currently connected to, post Brexit. I mean, they need us and we need them, kind of thing.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Jenny, I believe there's some questions.
Yes. So I suppose just one quick question. Just could you summarise how you choose the areas for wind power? Because I know there's been a few objections with the seabirds and things, and if we're going to reclaim all the seas for fishing, what percentage are we talking about of the sea that's going to be taken over with wind power? That was just a quick one. And there was a thing in Private Eye about solar power, and there's a huge plant down in Kent, is it, that's going to have solar generation, but there seemed to be a problem with the storage and batteries. So would all these interconnectors mean that you don't have to store the power? So, how does that work? And just the final one is also about the energy single market. So that would probably be the main question. So Bill Roger is asking, I don't know if he means the sort of, could we somehow stay in the single market EU-wide, or what about this UK single market that's being proposed? Is there an energy part to that?
I'll try to take them quickly then. In terms of, yeah, I mean, there's lots of, I mean, I can share maybe afterwards anyway, there's lots of documentation about the current, you know, map of the UK and the UK territorial, so you can see the current location and size into bracket of area of the seabed that is taken by offshore wind project. And it's true until recently that they were pretty small. I mean, you compared to the whole picture, but some of the more recent development and future development are going to take a fair amount of the space at sea. But remember as well that when you see a line on a map showing an offshore wind farm, I mean, that's the area, the boundary layout of the offshore wind farm. The actual wind turbines take a very small space on the seabed, and it's quite minimum. So it doesn't prevent other activities to take place. And it's actually also, you know, maybe even if it blocks away some fishing, it's actually good for recovery of population. So, and all these areas are, you know, it's a combination of economics factors, wind resource. There's a lot of constraint to do with, obviously there's all the shipping routes and weather. So there's all kind of aspect that comes into evaluating what is good area. So there's the Crown Estate has driven that process in the UK, both in the UK and Scotland waters, to highlight, to identify which were the areas ideally, you know, to be developed for offshore wind, and that's been a lot of consultation. I know there's obviously always some opposition, but to be honest, these days anyway, offshore wind farms tend to be further and further at sea. So yeah, it's you'll struggle to see them on the horizon for the future ones.
Just one quick follow up to that. I mean, recently the Scottish government or the Crown Estate in Scotland has started a process for licensing areas around the Scottish coast. I think there are 17 areas in total. Just because there are 17 on the map that they've issued doesn't necessarily mean that 17 will be, or 17 different wind farms will be developed. I believe there's a bit of a hierarchy in terms of the quality of those sites, you know, and so maybe, you know, there's 3 or 4 that are of high quality and will attract a lot of interest, and perhaps the rest you know, may or may not be developed, or maybe of variable size because they're not quite as good a quality. Yeah, sorry, that's just an addition to what you were saying, Rick. Yeah, carry on.
And then so quickly on your the second question on the solar project. So I'm not too aware of this specific project, but in general, as you said, Craig, being in your introduction, I mean, solar is about the same as onshore wind, and people tend to forget that in terms of installed capacity. There's around 13 plus gigawatts of, you know, it's 25% of the renewables installed capacity in the UK, just like onshore wind. But the difference is solar produces a bit less in terms of energy to do with something called the load factor. And again, just like wind, solar is an intermittent. So obviously during the day you get some solar and nothing at night. That's nothing new there. But the idea is indeed that battery storage is becoming much more competitive in terms of cost, and indeed for balancing all these kind of intermittent source of renewables, which, you know, kind of complement each other. Battery storage is at the cusp of becoming viable to at large scales, and indeed there's more and more planning in place for all the planning permission that we are aware of in terms of solar developments. They also already consider the possibility of potentially, not right now, but in the future, to add a battery storage, and that complements all this topic we had discussed before about interconnection. Regarding the third question, I was a bit unsure about you'd have either to repeat it to me, or maybe it's something I'll have to take offline, because I was maybe also less familiar with the electricity market.
Oh, it was about the energy single market. I don't. I guess that's just what's happening at the moment with the EU, but.
Yeah, maybe it's electricity sector market reform, which was something, but yeah, I probably would have to, if you maybe don't mind, maybe put me in touch with the person who asked the question. I'm more than happy to look further into that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. So that basically concludes the first section of the interview, Greg. So the second section is basically about Brexit and how it's affected you as a EU citizen living in the UK. So to kick off, just a simple question about the EU referendum in 2016. Were you surprised at the result of the referendum, and what was your immediate reaction to it?
Yeah, so indeed, I was eventually surprised. I knew I followed the polls and everything. I mean, as you know, I was not allowed to vote as a French citizen. I've never so far planned to request the UK nationality. So I was surprised. I was hoping that all these polls would prove wrong eventually, and that there would be still a comfortable margin for UK to remain. And it's disappointed that a large fraction of the population, especially in England, decided not to go for that. And I was a bit dismayed. Yeah, I think initially a bit like many people, I thought, well, maybe things would find a loophole or whatever, and they would find a way to especially when the campaigns, and there was so much difficulties, and I thought that maybe the new election would bring a party in place in power that would hopefully have a second referendum, but obviously that was not the case. So I think now I'm a bit resigned to the idea that it's going to happen, and I guess we'll see the outcome. And I suppose it's a monumental kind of experiment in terms of seeing the real impact. I mean, I think so far the problem has been that it's been hard to. I mean, there's been, I would say, more negative than positive, but not enough to change for anybody that maybe would voted one way or another to change their mind. I suppose only history will tell, the reality of the impact, as there'll be gradually more of a body of evidence to see what the impact will be in the coming years, and only then, I guess, when will people potentially change their mind. If it's proves to be as bad as potentially it will be, then maybe people will change their mind after that.
Yeah. No, that's good. Thanks very much for that. Just timekeeping statement. We I've got basically about eight or 9 minutes left, so we've got 3 more questions. So hopefully we'll get through those in that time. So a question about Brexit, where we are with Brexit now. So now we've arrived at 2020, and full Brexit is happening at the end of the year. Are you feeling more or less optimistic about being an EU citizen in the UK compared to how you were feeling in 2016?
Yeah, so I mean, I think on a personal basis, and especially, I guess, living in Scotland, which is very pro-EU, I've not seen any impact. I'm obviously very well integrated. I've got, as you say, my wife's Scottish. We've been here for a long time. I think I've got a bit of a Scottish twang, so people always wonder twice where I'm from anyway. And as you say, my name is not exactly French; it's actually Polish in origin. Although it's my great father was Polish, so I feel a bit quite integrated, and from that point of view. But I must admit that from my direct experience, I know. I don't know anybody who's kind of left back, but I think people like Europeans who I know in living here in the UK and in Scotland in particular have been pretty disappointed, and some of them who are maybe a bit less attached to and bound to the UK or Scotland, like myself, because of family background, some of them are indeed considering their views, whether it's going to be better long term to go back. And so that's one of the sad aspect of this. And I suppose as well, it'll be less of a pool for people currently living, especially those that people like me have. I think you have a question on settled status, but people who would like to consider moving. If I was, say, in the same situation I was 20 years ago, and to decide whether we'd live in the UK or in France with my wife, I guess it'll be pretty more of a pressure to think twice about coming to the UK because of that. So decision.
Yeah. Which is not a good state of affairs, really. No, absolutely. So just a question here then about the process of staying, if you like. How did you find the process of applying for settled status? Was it straightforward for you, and how did it make you feel having to do that? And if it was straightforward for you, do you know of other EU citizens, either in Glasgow or elsewhere, where they experienced any difficulties?
Yeah. So personally, I waited and waited until the last elections, just in case there was indeed a change and all this would be for nothing. So I waited and waited, and eventually, well, when after the election, I decided no. It actually was very straightforward. You just, again, the only problem was to take a photo of myself on my phone and then using that, but it was actually a surprisingly quick process. I also waited to make sure there was no all the initial teething problems that maybe were reported were gone. So I found it quite straightforward, and a couple of mostly French people I know told me as well they find it straightforward as long as you've been, I think if you've been here for a long time, and I don't know exactly what's going on in the background when the system checks you up, but I suppose if you've been here working for a long time, then and all the checks come back very quickly positive, and there's no issue. I think just like most of you, I suppose I've read in press that some people are, have had more difficulties, but I think it sounds like it was not been a big problem most of the time. If you've been more than a few years and you immediately get the full settled status, I think it's more of an issue if you've got the kind of intermediate ones where you need to show that you stay longer.
We've certainly, as a group, we've come across examples of people who have experienced difficulties, but as you say, for those that have been here a long time, and it seems to have been fairly straightforward.
Yeah, fairly straightforward.
Yeah. So a final question, again, a bit of crystal ball gazing. What are your hopes for the future? Do you think the UK will eventually rejoin the EU? And do you think that the whole of the UK will join the EU, or do you think that Scotland will eventually gain independence, rejoin the EU? How do you think things will?
Yeah, so I think my view is that long term, the hope would be the UK to rejoin, but that would only happen if two things need to happen for that. Number one, the Brexit needs to happen and definitely happen and have negative consequences that are obvious in terms of all the promises that were done by the Leave politicians to show and basically to have been misled, all the cash from the going to NHS and all this kind of stuff about jobs and all wonderful it'll be to reach trade agreements with all the other countries. So I guess that will only be we'll only find out in the next couple of years. I would say in the next maybe 5 years after 2021, we'll see for sure what the impact will be. I think the other thing that will be able to demonstrate how good or bad it's going to be is the attitude of all the other US, Japanese, Asian or other European companies, of whether they're going to keep on with investing in UK or actually decide at the end of the day that it's better to invest. I mean, I've got only anecdotal evidence that some lenders that we are dealing with and whatever may have rethought about whether they're going to bring more people to London or actually move them to Amsterdam, Paris, Dublin, or wherever else. So it's very anecdotal at the moment. So I think only once a few years have passed and potentially big decisions are made by big industry, and we'll see the real impact. And only then, if things are clearly negative and clearly pinned down to the UK having left the EU, will people maybe then change their mind? And then I'd like to think, hopefully, then a party will come up and certainly not the Conservative, but another party will be able to push on a campaign for a next generation on the basis that one of the agenda on the manifesto will be rejoining the EU. I mean, that's the only way it's going to happen, isn't it? I mean, for the whole of the UK, as far as I can know. Otherwise, until you have people have unfortunately suffered a little bit and see the disadvantage either at macroeconomic level or even at their individual level, let's say if people will start travel and realize that they have to pay more for this or for that, and or they're not covered by if they are falling sick in the EU, they'll realize actually it's been negative. And obviously depending on the so-called positive that we see. And then for Scotland, I guess that's long to, again, I've not quite seen how far that can go, whether Scotland can have another independence referendum. And if they do, I suppose on the back of that, we'll quickly see Scotland rejoining the EU because there's a clear majority here. But I'm not quite sure about whether the SNP is going to manage to force the hands of the current government or future government and get another independence referendum. But yeah, I guess for Scotland, there is pretty a quicker route to rejoining through that independence. But obviously, independence is another matter altogether.
Sure, yeah, which is probably a subject for another interview with somebody at some point. Well, Greg, that's been very, very good. I really enjoyed that, and thank you very much for taking part. It's greatly appreciated by the group and all the viewers that listen in or look at these chats on a Monday night. So thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much. Thanks everybody, and happy to again take any questions we've not been able to answer afterwards and respond to people.
Okay, there's just one question maybe from Jenny. Is this something that's come in?
Well, sorry, it's not a terribly positive comment, I guess. But
oh, right, okay.
Nikki says you're giving voters too much credit. So. And Victoria says merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay, thanks very much, Greg.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.